To start off, I don't want to waste anyone's time here. We have done a few other videos in this series. If you're looking how to play the game, like the basics, how it all works, I would say take a look up here. We have already touched on that. We've touched on deck building, which you can check up here as well. In this one, we are looking at the move from playing your games, you're down at your league, enjoying the game, you want to move into something more competitive. How can you improve your plays? How can you improve your decks? If you're an experienced player, probably not the video for you. You're going to know a lot of this stuff. However, this video is to help newer players. So in the comments below, drop any tips you have, any suggestions, any things you do before tournaments to improve your deck, to improve your play. Drop them in the comments below. I just want this video to be like a hub for new players coming in, wanting to move more into the competitive scene and to start getting a little more competitive with their decks. But let's get into this one with number one, know the meta game. So if you're going to play more competitively, you need to know the more competitive decks. Now, there's a few ways to do this. You can use websites like Limitless, where they have the latest tournaments, the latest deck lists, and you can read through them, take a look. Just keep an eye on things just so you know what you're doing. You could also watch regionals, internationals, all of that over on the Pokemon channel on YouTube and Twitch. So that's a great way to keep up with the game. Not only are you seeing the decks in action, but you're also seeing the cards they play, how they play them, and you're getting first-hand experience just taking a look, keeping an eye on what they're doing so you can replicate that in your game. So how does this help you at your local league? So let's say you're playing in a tournament. A lot of people will net deck. Now what that means is they take lists from online and they play that exact 60. It's something you can do as well. It's not something frowned upon. It's something very common in card games. If people master something, you want to play those best of lists. But if you're aware of those lists, if you're aware of the cards people are playing, let's say you're playing against Charizard EX in a tournament and you're struggling, you need a few turns to set up, you've got boss in hand. Do you bring up a Pokemon off their bench and maybe try and trap it? Is it worth it? You're only going to know that by watching games, by looking at deck lists and knowing sort of what those decks play. In this example, Charizard plays next to no switch cards, so yeah, that's a good idea. However, if you're playing against like a Lost Box, they play a ton, so it's probably not the ideal situation there, and you want to play a different supporter to sort of speed your game up and just try and get ahead. It also lets you prepare your own deck. So, for example, let's say a lot of decks are playing Path to the Peak at the moment, and your deck relies solely on Rulebox Pokemon using their abilities. Path to the Peak turns that off, so you're going to have to get creative with your deck lists, meaning you want to throw in lots of Lost Vacuum, lots of Stadium counters, so you're able to use those abilities. Again, a thing you will only know from looking at tournaments, looking at deck lists, and watching the meta game. The last advantage I would touch on is knowing weaknesses. So, for example, if the format is absolutely dominated by Roaring Moon and Charizard EX, both Dark-type Pokemon, the Terrestrial version of Charizard anyway, you probably then don't want to play a Psychic deck that is weak to Dark Pokemon. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean your local scene is going to be full of these other decks, but when decks get popular in the metagame, it does trickle down. You do see it a lot at leagues. So it just gives you that advantage of knowing maybe this isn't the best deck for now. It's why I always have 2 or 3 decks and like to cycle through them at different times. Knowing all of this stuff really does give you an advantage in choosing a deck, the cards in your deck, and you're going to know what you're up against. Next up, prize mapping. And what that means is, how are you going to finish this game? How are you going to take your 6 prizes in the easiest way for you? So if their board is full of 2 prize Pokemon, maybe you want to go 2-2-2. And if they throw up a single prize Pokemon into the active, maybe you want to boss around that and work around it. Especially if they only have the 1 single prizer, it can really mess up your math, meaning you're taking 7 prizes instead of 6 and have to attack 4 times instead of 3. This might not seem like a massive difference, but it is the difference between winning and losing games. Especially in stuff like Miraidon and those mirror matches, it can be the difference between winning and losing. As well as looking at your prize map and playing to your advantages, knowing what you need to do, you need to know what your opponent needs to do as well. If you're playing a single prize deck and suddenly you throw down a Lumineon V to use the ability and go fetch a supporter card, they now have a much easier route to winning. They only need to take 4 knockouts and then the 5th one onto the Lumineon instead of the 6. So that speeds up their prize map. You need to be aware of that when taking knockouts. It probably means you have less turns to set up and you need to get swinging straight away. Knowing when you're going to win and when your opponent is going to win, and most importantly how, it can be crucial in taking those matchups that are normally favored for your opponent. You throw up a single prizer, you throw out the prize map, and you then take the lead. You effectively want to create your fastest route while also stopping your opponent and slowing them down. It's why things like Disruption cards can be so important. Things like Iono we see play a ton of. If it's getting to the late game, Iono them, and they might not have the tools to take the knockouts they need, then swinging the prize map back into your favor, meaning those games are going to be won much easier. Now, this is another one I see at League and just sort of players getting into the game, benching stuff when they don't need to. So if you've got, let's say your opponent needs 2 prizes. If your hand is full of 2 prize Pokemon, you maybe don't want to drop them on the bench. The important thing there is take a look at their HP. Are they going to survive an attack from your opponent? Let's say they're swinging for 200. Do you really want to put that Mew EX onto your bench? Those small decisions, and like I say, knowing what your opponent needs, knowing what you need, and play into that can be a massive improvement in your game. Tip number 3, reading your opponent. Now, some of this can be sort of, it's more poker-esque, sort of, you can take stuff from their body language, how they're talking, how they decide to play out their turn, which is something you can learn, is something that you can just pick up on. Maybe you're good at reading people. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be them themselves, but how they play their turn. For example, if they bench a Pokemon, attaching energy and pass, you maybe don't want to play that Judge or Iono in your hand, giving them a chance to see some new cards, because more than likely they've got nothing else to play. So how they play cards, the order they play them, which cards they play, can be indicative of how strong their hand is, and it's something you need to be aware of. Instead of slamming down that Iono just to refresh your hand, maybe you just hold or you play something that just draws you cards like Avery or a Research. It's important to take note of what your opponent is doing as well as what you are doing. Don't just think you need to race your strategy, do what you need to do quickly. Take a moment. If they didn't do anything, maybe they haven't got anything, and you can just take the advantage that way. Number 4, one of the most important is resource management. When you first check your deck, make sure you take a few extra seconds. You do get extra time to do this, so don't worry. Just take a look through your deck, see which Pokemon are missing. Maybe you need certain cards for this matchup. Let's say you're playing against Charizard EX and you need your Justified gloves to give you that extra boost in damage. Make sure they are in the deck on your first search. Count your energy, know what's missing, know what's in your prizes. Because then when you come back later, let's say you play Arvid and you're looking for a card, you don't want that card not to be there. You've played your supporter, you can't take it back. You need to know those cards are in your deck before you play the card. This can also become very important later on. Let's say you're playing a Lost Zone deck and you need a certain energy. Let's say some are in a discard pile, you've got 1 in hand. How many are left in your deck? This is something you need to know at the start. You can actually keep note of your prizes, obviously once you've worked them out from your deck. So it is a good thing and a good idea and a good practice to get into. It just means when you slam that Mirage Gate down, late game, you know which energies you're looking for and you know they're in the deck. It's not a game of chance and you hope they're in there. Look at them early on, take a note, and it's your opponent that's going to be caught out and not you. Finally, we've got maximize your chances. Now, I would say this one is the most important. You want to maximize every time you draw a card. In Pokemon, unlike other games, you can draw so many cards, you can search. So that luck is almost in your hands. In other games, you just have to draw and hope. In this, we can thin our deck, we can remove stuff we don't need. Thinning basically means taking out those cards we're not going to need to optimize the chances of drawing the ones we do. In this example, let's say we've got 10 cards left in our deck. 7 are Pokemon, 3 are energy. Now we need to hit an energy to win this game. We are going to play Hop, which draws 3 cards. Now you could just slam it down and hope, and I think when starting out, most people will just go for that. They're assuming, I need to draw it, it's all down to luck. But you can skew it in your favor. Let's say, for example, in hand we've got a couple of Nest Balls. Slam those down, grab those Pokemon out of the deck, and now it's 5 Pokemon to 3 energy, slightly better odds, slightly more chance of hitting that card we need to finish the game. That is a very basic example, but doing that, thinning those cards out, throwing stuff away, so when you get judged, when you get Iono'd, they're not going back into your deck, and your deck is just full of cards you need, rather than some of those that have already passed the point of being useful. Stuff like Heavy Ball, VIP Pass, cards that you've already checked, you know you don't need, or it's not the first turn anymore. Get those out of your deck, discard them with Ultra Balls, thin out those Pokemon, and you will notice a massive improvement in your game. You'll notice those games where you're just drawing and hoping are a little easier when you thin your deck. The other thing of maximizing your chances, I touched on it there slightly, is the Judge and Iono cards, where you get to shuffle not only your hand but your opponent's. These are crucial cards. Having those in your deck when your opponent takes a lead means you can get back into it. If you Iono them down to 1, 2 cards, they're basically drawing off the top, which we just spoke about. They can increase their odds, which we've also touched on. But if it's early on and they've taken some early prizes, they've not gone through their deck yet, they've still got a ton of cards, they don't necessarily need to win this one. You can win games off a good Iono or Judge, maybe slam the path down with it. It might not seem like it, you'd rather play the research and just draw more cards, but cards like Iono and Judge do make the difference and do win games. Like I said, this video isn't for you experienced players, but if you've got tips, drop them in the comments below. This is for you new players looking to make that move into the more competitive scene. Just maybe improve your play or your deck choices, how you play that deck, which cards you put in. Hopefully this has been some help. I did get the request in a comment on a how-to video, which is why I've made this. If it's been any help, let me know in the comments below. That is honestly my favorite part of doing this and is why I do it. I just love to know I've helped more players move from the casual play to the more competitive side and just got into the game in general. Like those how-to videos, how to deck build, how to play, have been my most popular videos, and I've had hundreds if not thousands of people just thanking me or asking questions, and it's honestly so rewarding. So I just want to thank all of you for the support. This is hopefully going out just before New Year, so Merry Christmas to you all and a Happy New Year, and I will catch you in the next one.